Yeah, we do it differently by discipline
Mm.
because it is more typical in the sciences to say what was known before and then to define what you did and then to say the here we show bit and show what you did. But in the humanities, you'll bury yourself. And so this is social sciences, which sits right between the two. And so in the humanities, you have to say what you believe first, or they'll assume that everything you think just came from someone else and you have to have some original bit. So you start with you and then you let them chime in. So if you have the humanities here at one end of a spectrum and you have the hard sciences here at the other end, the social sciences sit right in the middle, are a little closer to the sciences. But you have to learn to frame yourself as a strong voice in this. I'll say more in writing because I'm better in writing, especially at 6. But if you see these disciplines as a continuum with the social sciences very ambiguously between the two, I think then you can learn a way to really frame yourself in a more scientific, but still with the voice of the humanities.
As everyone else has said already, embed it within the literature, and also very small, the questions. So when we're thinking about research questions, we often have very bold, big ideas, which is great, but you'll find it helps to kind of narrow that down. So it's actually a very small thing you're asking. You can always expand it, but we often fall into trouble if we are over ambitious or our question is too broad that we don't quite know what we're doing. So it was just to echo, I think, what was said previously, keep it really small and simple.
When actually writing up some of this stuff, I think there's a tendency that people will write too much. They'll try and tell you too much. So actually, in terms of framing your research in the literature, you really need to say what we need to know and only what we need to know. You don't need to tell us about the whole history of the field or about anything like that. Tell us what we need to know to understand why you're doing the research that you're doing.
I think when we talk about number, how many, when we try to quantify how big or small, it is all relative, isn't it? It's relative to which type of a study I'm doing. Is it a part of my master's research? I will be getting a degree, or it is PhD or MPhil, or I am a research associate in a particular institute. I have to do research as a part of my job description. So I would say that that's why we are having this type of conversation. Sometimes we can't learn things, that how many objectives, how many research questions, which research question is good or bad. You have to work with the experts or work with the supervisor. That's why we always have a supervisor to guide us, or a research guide. And we often, at the beginning of our career, we become part of a team. It is so important. I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't answer that how many objective or how many research questions. It depends upon the research you want to conduct, the research questions you would like to find answer to. And you have found that, yes, these research questions, the answer is so important, not for me as a researcher, but for the discipline or the society, greater society I live in. That will allow you to frame your research questions. But you have to remember that you work or you conduct a research within a time frame. You have a specific amount of resources. You have a particular things to achieve, a thesis to submit. All will guide you whether you will answer one research objective or 3 research questions. All depends upon so many factors, and we may learn it while doing it.
I really like to let the field define the questions at first until I found my feet in the field. And even now, I look for unanswered questions that have been defined by scholars. They'll often say it is not known. They'll often say more research is needed. And I search for these words with an actual physical keyword search. And they pop right up. If you go into the problem is journal access, and we can talk about that later. And some will give you guest access if you get to know people in their field, so that I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. But in general, you can look for people who've recently defined unanswered questions to find a good place to start.
I think just to extend to what Carol's saying, I think that's a really good idea, a really good tip. And I think the other place you can find, admittedly, as Carol said, with the limitations of access, is where you've got in research where people have described their study limitations. And it might be that there was something they wanted to do, but they ran out of time, or they didn't have, you know, the right facilities or whatever else. That might give you an idea of something you could then say, well, I'm interested in this, I'm going to carry that on. Maybe even talking to the researcher that's given you that idea first, but also it might help you understand that there was something that they did that didn't work, and you're also not going to repeat that. So it can be quite helpful to have ideas of things to try, but also are kind of aware that there might be a trap further down the line you don't want to fall into, so what you could avoid there as well.
But the thing to remember as well is that obviously this is not just a straight line. You don't ask a question and move towards the answer. Often you end up going backwards and forwards a bit. So you might start with quite a broad question that you don't know the answer to. And then as you do your literature review, you will find that the answers are known, and then you'll refine your question and you'll keep kind of moving down. So that ultimately what you have is quite a small question that you might write up at the end in your dissertation or your research paper, but you might have started with quite a broad question. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't one process. It's the same process lots of times.